Hello and welcome to Self Talk. I'm your host, Rachel Astarte. Today, I'm very excited to have back on the show Abdi Assadi. He was a guest not long ago. Abdi is a spiritual counselor and healer with 4 decades of clinical experience in acupuncture, body-centered psychotherapy, indigenous shamanic practices, and diverse meditative techniques. He's also the author of Shadows on the Path, Revelations and Pitfalls on the Spiritual Journey, and A Healer's Handbook, a guide for the beginner practitioner. Welcome back, Abdi.
Good to see you, Rachel.
It's always so nice to see you. So we're going to tackle a number of things today, but one of the subjects that's been coming up a lot for me personally, for people I've spoken with, clients, friends, is how do we maintain balance in these turbulent times? Now, when we talk about, I mean, it's a big tent that we're pitching to start this conversation, but we'll kind of set the campsite up around it and have a little fireside chat. But what we're referring to, for those who are listening, and maybe this is already resonating with you, we're talking about that psycho-spiritual balance, right? Those of us who are doing the inner work, trying to show up in the world in a balanced way, staying true to our spiritual path, trying to stay sane. Should we try to stay sane? Are we sane? I don't know. Because it's about finding the balance between being engaged in what's going on in the world and also preserving our souls, right, as we go through it. And because there's a lot of garbage out there. And before I open the floor to you, I think it's important to point out that we're almost always in turbulent times. This is not new for humanity by any stretch. So for my listeners and my clients who are grappling with this, and we talk about it a lot, like, this feels like end times. And I'm sure it did during the 1920 pandemic as well, or during World War II, or the fall of the Roman Empire. I'm sure it felt like end times then too. So bringing all that into a more holistic cosmic perspective, I don't think the way through it changes much. But we do have a particular flavor of this century. And I couldn't think of anyone better to have on the show to talk about this. So Abdi, what are your thoughts, either about what's going on or diving into the maintaining balance?
Well, you said it beautifully. I mean, always the ego wants to go to a place. Oh my God, it's end of times, end of times. If you think of World War II, all the stuff that you said, the pandemic, I would say for those of us who straddle two worlds, which is probably your listeners, which have a spiritual life and are also in the world, the work is always to stabilize the consciousness. To your point of what's different, the only thing that's different between, let's say, 1940s, 1920s, is the level of attachment people have and how much they're being fed by social media, which we talked about last time. That's it's wonderful in that we can have this connection. It's wonderful. We get to learn about the world. The problem with it is that it's so easy to get pulled off center. First of all, just from a nervous system level. So whether you're watching something you love or something you don't like or something you agree with or something you don't agree with, the nervous system gets really amped up. So all of us are in this very hyper-mobilized state all the time, and it's quite addictive. And then the algorithms of all of these social media outlets, they're just really finely honed in to get people addicted. So stabilizing consciousness, that's what I would say, stabilizing consciousness. How do we keep our consciousness stable? So all the stuff that everyone does, meditating a couple of minutes a day, some kind of exercise, spending time with a pet, spending time in nature. But the main thing is to connect with self. What am I feeling and what's happening outside? So even if I want to consume, it's like if you consume bad calories for you, then you exercise it off. It's the same thing with the media, right? We all want to be engaged. We want to know about the world. The question is, how is our relationship with self? That's always the invitation. And self, capital S. right? So this is the thing. This is the brackish water between spirit and material life. I, for one, am in the world. I've had the out of the world experience. I've had those. For me, that's not my game, which I think is probably for a lot of people who listen to you, are people who are in the world, but also have the foot in the other world, which is really self. It's not outside of it. And that's the invitation always. How's my relationship, regardless of what's going on?
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, and something that is the foundation of everything that we're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
which is this all starts with us, and that's not a selfish perspective. It is a
Mm-hmm.
capital S
Beautiful.
self perspective, which is something you and I talked about the last time that you
Right.
were on the show. And again, just for people who haven't heard this before, would you briefly recap the difference between the small s self and the
Mm-hmm.
capital S self?
So small self is the ego self, right? And the ego is not a negative thing. The ego becomes a negative force when it's running. It's like a wild horse that doesn't have a rider. So selfishness is actually when it's devoid of spirit, when we actually get very limited in our consciousness. The capital S self or the capital L love, which is the same thing to me, it's really when we have both feet again in both worlds. We're not just hypnotized. So part of the curse of the hyper individuated culture is that we can get very hypnotized and our viewpoint is everything and our right and wrong. And we're very like small self motivated. The picture here is to keep it more open. It doesn't mean that you cannot have preferences or aversions. It just means that you don't take them as that's your guiding light. My preference and my aversion. That me-centeredness is what the suffering comes from. So then again, you want it to be a little bit more permeable, not permeable enough that it starts destroying you, because that's also, we need a level of ego protection, right? But what is very easy to happen, especially with what's going on in our culture, is we get hyper focused on the ego part. And then that thing, instead of become a membrane that keeps spirit and life flowing, it becomes a callus. And then it actually then doesn't allow it. Same skin. But callus skin then is a little too rough. You don't taste things, you don't feel things. So yeah, it's a softening. It's a softening of the ego while protecting one's well-being, emotional well-being.
Yeah, yeah. And that says a lot too. So when we talk about the hyper individualist
Mm-hmm,
society, that
mm-hmm,
everybody, and there's been a huge movement toward community building, village
mm-hmm,
building. These are
mm-hmm.
buzzwords now,
Yes,
that it isn't about the self so much anymore.
right.
I think it's important to clarify they're talking about, or what I interpret
Mm-hmm.
it to mean, is the small s self,
Beautiful,
right? Because the capital S self is community.
beautiful,
But
beautiful.
the way that we are all interconnected, which again is buzzy language.
Yeah, so
But
the buzzy language is very interesting, right? Again, it's one can't make these grand statements. There's always exceptions, but in my experience of being a healer for 40 years and seeing buzzy words come around every 10 years, the buzzy word always seems to be the ego still wanting to do its shtick under the guise of now it's this, now it's oneness, now it's new age, now it's village. But one can't underestimate. Now, the hyper individuated self is also an incredible thing. As a guy who was raised in Africa and in Asia, where there was no individuation, and I lived in those villages, there's a beauty there, but there's also a pain there where then everybody minds your business. What are you doing? And then we can't do certain things. So the beauty of hyper individualization is you really get to experience yourself and do things. But once you get too far out on that, it's a very lonely place, right? So one of the biggest things that I see is there's a lot of loneliness here. And it doesn't matter. People are in relationship. People live in cities. When the narcissism gets so profound, that's when the callus gets so thick that the self can't really feed itself. And then what happens is consumerism becomes the imitation of relationship. So we're starving. So then we consume as a way of feeding self. And it becomes a very painful thing. Now, again, it's not about becoming a monk. It's not about shaving our head. We're in this incarnation very specific to experience. It's all about balance. But balance is a tricky thing in a hyper-individuated culture because the ego and, everything outside is a reflection of inside. So it's not like some big bad wolf. It's us. What we disown owes us, right? So it's that disown part that's knocking on all of our doors right now to wake us up, to be like, what would you like? So the buzzword is one thing, the direct experience is very different.
yeah,
Correct? Yeah, that's what you're saying.
yeah. And there's a lot of it. And so, and language means something.
Mhm.
So I get very, as a writer, I'm very cautious about how words are being used and what they mean. And so even talking about the true self, capital T, capital S,
Yes, yes,
even that can get tiring after a while
of course.
when I'm talking about what I do. And there is a danger of the desensitization
Sure.
of how important the work is. And you touched on it, and I want to make sure we don't skip past
Mm-hmm.
it. The importance of the self
Mm-hmm.
and in the greater whole.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So
Mm-hmm.
why do we do this inner work? So we do it so that the whole is
Mm-hmm.
healthier. So it
Yes.
can look like we're being selfish or look
Mm-hmm.
like we are doing all this inner work for our own benefit, but that's ultimately what I'm hearing you say.
Mm-hmm.
That's ultimately the small s ego self. Like,
Yes. So it's really funny you said it. I was having this discussion with someone a couple of days ago. The people who say I'm being selfish are the ones that are never selfish. So if you have some awareness I'm being selfish, it's about actually being in relationship with self. What we, on an archetypical level, identify as selfishness is someone who's out of relationship with self. If you're in relationship with self, the capital L self, it's not that all of a sudden, you give everything away. You have a relationship with it, but there's a softness and a kindness. We all have had an experience. We have that softness within us and the times when we're very aggressive. We also can feel when we are around someone who's in relationship with their self, there's a softness in them. There's a comfort. You don't feel scared. You're not hyper aware of what are they going to say. Are they going to look at me? It's just a gentleness. So it's also a very kinesthetic sensation, right? And it's not some otherworldly experience. It's just something that we've forgotten. This is the dark side, the shadow side of the hyper individuation. The whole stuff that we talk about, people are selfish, they're narcissistic. It's pain. But what's pain? The pain is because when one's not in relationship with self, it's painful. It doesn't matter how many zeros in the bank account, doesn't matter how many cats, dogs, kids, no kids. It's not about that. So what we're doing, this is just all these words obviously are very tricky, is just inviting oneself to sit with oneself. What am I feeling? Am I sad today? Am I happy? Am I joyous? How am I being? I just talked to someone. Did I betray myself? Was I too aggressive to them? Was I cruel? How are my thoughts? It's just literally, it sounds so, it's very simple stuff. Who am I? What am I feeling? Why did I act like that? I was happy the way I reacted to that. I need to look at this. Every time this happens, I react this way. Just looking at these things. It's not even that you have to sit down and shave your head and meditate 20 minutes a day, although I think it'd be amazing to both shave your head and meditate 20 minutes a day. It's more just a relationship that constantly, right? Our meditation practice, whatever someone has, their exercise, they're walking their dog, that's just an invitation. So how do you extend that another 10 hours a day, 15 hours a day? These moments you're like, how am I feeling? Right now, me, you're talking, how am I feeling? How's my breath? How's my speech? Am I too fast? Am I too low? It's constantly being vigilant while paying attention. And it's not arduous work. It's actually an invitation to a joyous experience of self. Like, who is this guy? Who is this guy? Who's this woman? All right, you to yourself. Who's Rachel? Who's happy? So that's what we're talking about here.
yeah. And I think it's also important to point out when we start doing this self-inquiry, and I want to talk about Sri Ramana Maharshi and self-inquiry in a second. Love that stuff. But the danger that I see with my clients, and maybe you do as well, is when they start doing this self-inquiry, there's a lot of judgment. Oh, I handled that conversation very poorly. And now what? Now, and so there's a lot that can actually bring us back into the small s self.
Sure.
Right.
So this is beautiful. This is a really important point you're making. So the trick there is, remember, things like Vicharya, self-inquiry, Ramana Maharshi, the tradition, these were not hyper-individuated cultures. So what we have a need for is actually psychotherapy, psychology. Spirituality and psychology have to be married in a culture that's so hyper-individuated. Because in an unhyper-individuated culture, people's minds necessarily would not go to that. They judge themselves. They're just using it as a practice. They're like, oh, there's a cloud in the sky. They're not like, oh my God, the cloud is so bad in the sky. It's not an experience. They're having a more direct experience. So this is also the important thing of how do we actually go to this place that you're describing. And then if we're having pain from our childhood, pain from other experiences, this is where psychotherapy comes in. That's not the function of who am I, like Ramana Maharshi would teach, Vicharya, These are very separate things. This also gets very muddled and it can be quite tricky waters to navigate. So I'm a big fan, again, like I've talked about, that's what Shadows was about. Psychology has to be intertwined with the spiritual practice you're describing for most people. Some people, happy childhood, never met them. But for a lot of us, there's been some level of wounding. Some of us way more than others. Some people are very minute. God bless them, wonderful. But the psychology part, so when these things come in, that's not the job of the spiritual practice. That's a job of psychotherapy to address these neurotic impulses, right? And in my experience, I've treated 10, 12, 13,000 people over 40 years. We're pretty brutal. Most people, if not all, but I'll leave some room there for most people I've come across internally, whether aware or not. There's a very harsh dialogue happening. It's a very harsh dialogue happening. Just most people aren't aware of.
Yeah, and the what they are aware of, it seems, is that desire to criticize, self-criticize.
Yes.
And that seems to be almost inherent. And I wonder, just in my own work and my own musings, that it seems to me that the very first pain that we have is the pain of separation from source, from the divine.
Sure.
And that gets played out.
Sure.
As soon as we're born, we're physically separated from the mother, and then we have to call out for and maybe receive or maybe don't receive. And so obviously that makes us wonder, are we enough? If I cry and my mother doesn't come with the milk.
These are real things. These are real things. And I've had experience of people, this one gentleman many decades ago who's not with us anymore, who had done incredible Freudian analysis, the old school 3-4 times a week for like decades. He actually could remember of literally being like 4 months old and exactly what you're describing. He would verbalize these things. It was just chilling. And one can do that work and still not emotionally connected. So there's not a layer connected to what you're saying, not a layer on top of it. Connected to that is, so there's an intellectual part of processing that. There's an emotional part of feeling that. And that's actually the hard part. And then there's something wrapped around this, no matter how devoted one is to spirit, however, whatever your relationship with her is or language you want to use for it, a lot of us feel betrayed. There's a lot of pain in our lives. A lot of us are like, we want to be loving, but also there's a part of us, which is the 2-year-old, to your point, who's got 2 fingers up to the universe being like, fuck you. Why am I suffering so much? Why is there so much suffering? I get that everything, it's all one. Okay, but why are people suffering? Why are people so cruel? So that's a whole thing that also has to be experienced in order to be healed. Right? So it's not this like smiley face. So to your point of buzzwords, many times these buzzwords are band-aids for a festering wound. And the wound doesn't need to be fixed. The wound just needs to be felt. The wound doesn't need to be intellectually understood. It just needs to be felt. That's the magic of it. So people feel very overwhelmed. So it's not about sitting down, if you haven't meditated, and meditating 3 hours a day. Start with 5 minutes. What am I feeling? And it can be very overwhelming if one is actually sitting with it. And that's not that anything wrong. Just to your point is the nature of this realm, the original separation. And for the people who are spiritual, many of us have come to spirituality as looking for a band-aid because we're in pain. You're not in pain, you usually don't go looking around. You just do your thing and you move on. So that's also something to be addressed. Again, not sexy things to talk about. Certainly my experience in terms of being a clinician for a long time.
Yeah, so let's go a little bit further into that, the body aspect of it. So we talk, many of us who are doing holistic work or transpersonal work, mind, body, spirit, again, a phrase that is buzzy and has been for a very long time. We tend to have a lot to say about the spirit and the spirituality and the practice and the meditation and the mind and the psychology and all of that. We very rarely go into the body part. Only recently has there started to be a little more talk, maybe in the last decade or so, about somatic work and things like this. But there's a synthesis, isn't there, between all three, and being able to access what we're literally feeling in a moment is so important. So what would you, or what path would you recommend for people who aren't familiar with how do I access my body? I had a client once who said, I'm dead from the neck down. And we had to work very, very slowly so that they could finally start to feel. There was so much trauma, yeah. So
That's really, well, the fact that a person can say that, that's actually profound.
yeah.
Because for most of us, I used to laugh as a kid when I used to wear men put on ties, and I was like, how perfect that we're just cutting the head away from the body, right? All the businessmen would be gangbangers and all that stuff. Like, this is incredible. So it registered for me at a very young age. And now, yes, there's really wonderful somatic work coming up the last, I would say, 20 years. But anyone who's a body worker really realizes that the body holds all the information on trauma. Remember, the brain is really 200 years old the way we use it. The body's been around for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years, right? So all the things everyone knows. Your gut has the same neuropeptides as your brain. Your gut was your original brain before your head brain was developed. The invitation here is to actually feel. And most people, unless they've done inner work, what they think feelings are, someone cuts them off in a street, on a car, and they get angry, like, that's my feelings. No, that's actually just a reaction. The feelings are the things that are underneath at the same time, and they're not all bad. Some of them are incredibly joyous, some are incredibly peaceful. But when we shut that down from original trauma, we actually stop feeling. And the level of cruelty that we inflict on each other with language, with actions, with all the things that we do to the planet, to each other, to animals, it really comes from that relationship with self. You only treat the outside the way you are internally, right? And there's a level of cruelty because of the disconnection on this planet. It's not easy business to open up. So one also has to really start softening in a way, but keeping enough of a protection. You don't want to go deal with some narcissistic psychopath and be wide open. You'll get eaten alive. So there's also this dance that we need to be aware of. But most of us do not have that relationship, right? So we can do medicine, we can do MDMA, we can do, whatever medicine one uses, ketamine, mushrooms, have these profound experiences. Those experiences are only invitations to what's underneath. Those neuropeptides are in us all the time. You can do Ajax and not have an experience. You do something like psilocybin because your brain has those receptor sites. So again, to just a simple exercise, these are all these words. What does this mean? Just feel your feet right now as you're talking. Whoever's listening to us, I always say, just literally kinesthetically feel my feet. And people are like, what the hell does that mean? No, just, can you feel your feet on the ground? Can you feel your cross-legged? Can you feel yourself standing? That's what we're talking about, kinesthetic awareness. Interestingly enough, we talked about this last time, I believe, in Chinese medicine and Chinese martial arts, where your awareness is where the energy flows. So when that patient of yours says, hey, I feel dead below the neck, when you're constantly cerebral, actually you're shutting the energy system flow to the rest of the body. Why do we do that? To your point, when you're 2 years old, 1.5 years old, children breathe abdominally, depending on the level of trauma they've had to endure, and then that stops and becomes thoracic. So one of the first days we commit suicide is we stop breathing, right? You breathe abdominal, half a gallon of oxygen, thoracic, half a pint. You don't breathe 4 minutes, you die. So this shutting down starts at a very, very early age. That's why people do yoga or do martial arts, have these profound awakenings. What's happening? You're breathing, you're feeling your body. So again, to this point, like, what do? Just literally lay on the ground or sit, just relax your stomach, like you have a little Buddha belly, and force some air into your lower body. See what happens.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. And just something as simple as that. But it's just, okay, yeah, I can do belly breathing, but my mind can still be out here. It's really about.
It is. And remember, we're all very impatient. So part of our anxiety, born out of this disconnection and separation from a young age, we're highly anxious. Anxiety can be tolerated, right? Anxiety, even highly clinical ones where people need to be medicated, which can be very useful with it. Part of that is one has to start making friends with it. The more you push away from something, the more intense it gets. Now, we're talking, for many of us who are highly anxious, we're talking a couple of minutes a day. Then it might be really hard to sit and do that. Just slow walking, right? The old school Zen practice of counting your steps, walking in a circle, right? Just literally like count to 5, come back. Most people won't make it past 2. Your mind will be somewhere else. We're just talking about, you're not going to get one-pointed minds from sitting 2 minutes. We're just talking about, what am I feeling? Most people you sit with, I used to say this all the time when I would practice. I would ask people, how are you? Good. They'd come together, and I'm like, we're going to go through that again. How are you doing? Oh yeah, I don't know. That was honest.
Mm.
Oh yeah, I guess I'm really sad. I'm really angry. Or like, I actually feel really happy. But the initial response is good because no one really is asking and no one's really replying. So again, we're talking about who is this person? Who is you? What's this meat suit? What's your relationship? It's really that. We have to work not to be strangers to ourselves.
Mm.
And something I can tell you as a guy who's been around a lot of death, right? My years working with AIDS patients, a lot of cancer patients, work with a lot of vets. The energy always is so much pain that we haven't felt. People, when they're on their deathbed, many times like, oh my God, I don't know who I am, or I don't have a relationship with myself. And that's something you want to do while you're alive. That's something you want to do. Illness is an invitation to do that. That makes both life easier, and when time of transition comes, makes that easier.
Mm.
But this is not a, oh my God, this is so heavy. Just the opposite. It makes life lighter. A lot of the shit that we struggle with are not that important. One can say that. It's not about, oh, belittle it. How can one have a relationship where one can actually even solve these things or tolerate them in a way that we're not in this high anxiety state? That just takes attention.
Yeah.
And not attention out, attention in. Right?
Right. Right. And that's the important. And I think there's a lot of fear I've experienced. There's
Oh,
a lot of fear attached to that. I don't think I'm going to like what I feel. I don't think I'm going to like
because
what,
yeah,
yeah.
we're strangers from ourselves.
Mm.
So someone like mine and your age, I'm older than you, but we've been around when social media wasn't here the way it is now. One thing is very interesting from a Chinese medicine perspective. We know in Western medicine, when you are constantly looking at a screen or outside yourself, your sympathetic nervous system goes wild. So that's a very real thing. So if people are cortisols are out the roof, their adrenals are off the roof. But there's another thing energetically, when you're constantly stimulated to your eyes, the Chinese say that your heart, quote unquote, is not your physical heart, your energetic heart, the seat of your spirit becomes um, unrelaxed. It becomes disturbed. You get Shen disturbed. Your spirit gets disturbed. So there's also something like just a 5 or 10 minutes of just having downtime, of just no screens, low light, just to sit in that, forget about getting in touch with these things, just to get the nervous system to come down. So we're so in this hyper state. We're driving 160 miles an hour all day long. We just have to just even go to 55. Don't worry about parking it. That takes a long time. Drive at 55, drive at 70, right? So this thing also, what you're saying, yes, we're afraid of it. So the fear then, meaning of self, we also get super busy. So then we just don't want to, we want to go 170 all day and then lay in bed and then just put in parking. That's why insomnia is one of the biggest problems right now. People's nervous systems are really high agitated. So again, just to take the example of the screens, just some time off from that. And I mean literally all light, right? Like just to have a little bit of time in a day where you're just visually not putting input. And also through your ears, you're not orally, you're not putting input. And through your mouth, you're not orally, not orally. All of those three things. We're talking minutes here. It's such a profound practice with the intention of like, I'm just going to sit myself. I'm going to sit here and have a relationship with myself. That's the invitation.
Yeah. And what I love about that is that it's so simple. People like practical advice, and just to say you don't have to go deep, you need to just slow down.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And again, to me, I'm into simple. We can have all these flowery languages, which I love. You can read for flowery things. This, you have to bake the cake. And baking the cake is not, you don't have to get a mastery and go to CIA and become an amazing chef. We're talking, what is the baking? What are the ingredients? The ingredients is you and attention. Okay, what can you break that down to? Well, it's attention of actually kinesthetically feeling the body and a little bit of breathing. Okay, what does that mean? Literally right now again, I feel my butt on a chair, feel my feet on the floor. I'm paying attention to my posture. My chin goes in a little bit. Right? When chin goes forward, we become extra cerebral. Chin goes a little bit. My spine extends to the ceiling, back of it. Boom.
Mm-hmm.
And you can feel it, just things slow down. So if again I say, hey, Rachel, try to relax, oxymoron. If I say, Rachel, feel your body, boom. A couple of minutes later, the body just starts relaxing.
Yeah. Yeah. And we forget too that our body is always speaking with us.
Beautiful.
And it's nice to just be able to listen. So talking about the body as an ally,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to just the meat suit. Yeah, it
Yes.
is. It's,
Yes.
it's your
Yes.
phrase, and I love it. I mean,
Yes.
for whatever, a decade ago when you first shared that with me, I laughed so hard, but it's true. That's what it feels like. and that we have this meat suit that our spirit is in. But it's more than that. You know, we can be, it's like having this best friend in the sidecar that's telling
Beautiful.
us how to do stuff and is not
Beautiful.
navigating the motorcycle through, you know, and we're saying, I'm not listening to you at all.
100%.
And so, yeah.
So the meat suit for me, the joke was because people were literally treating it as a meat suit. I mean, there's obviously like spirit in flesh, but also the joke of it was literally like people take better care of their clothes than they do of their body. So I'm not saying so you can put the expensive products on your face or go work out in the gym. That's not really taking care of the body. That's taking care of some aspect of the body. But to have a relationship, right? Most people put more attention to the shirt and they get it washed or dry cleaned or whatever, as opposed to the actual body. So you can have amazing diet, very important. You can exercise, very important. You can even meditate, very important. But actually just sitting, but like, what am I feeling? Like just that thing. It's amazing how many times we don't know. And the body, it whispers, but it whispers in very, very loud voice. But it's still a whisper, but it's also very loud. So I find one of the things when people need a psychic reading or need some kind of advice, many times because they know something is off. And if you just sit with them, they'll actually answer the questions that they have. So the body knows. Sure, sometimes we need someone to help us with that. But at the end of the day, we know everything. And when I say we, it's that exactly spirit and body connected.
Yeah. And so that's, and you talked about this a little bit earlier. So I want to go back to working with the dying, working with people who at the end of their lives are saying, I don't even know myself. This is part of the process, 100%. Right? To become more intimate with our physical bodies as well as our minds and our spirits in this very simple way.
Yes.
But I think there's something else too connected to that, which is how attached we become to this world, and that somehow this work, the inner work, the mind, body, spirit work, paves the way toward that reunification with where we came from. Beautiful. And I wonder if you could speak to that.
Well, me and you were talking about last time we spoke about how old age, right? I mean, there's a whole different thing when people get sick and die young, which is so heartbreaking. But, you know, the invitation always is to know the self. You cannot die not scared unless you have a relationship with self. I had a chapter in Shadows on a Path called Living with Death as Your Advisor. It sounds very morose, but it's just the opposite of that. So actually, one thing I did for years, and you know, it's Ramana Maharshi, that's where I got that from 40-some years ago, is, you know, I would lay down and feel like I just got hit by a car on my motorcycle, I'm side of a road, I'm dying. And once the heady stuff would go away, it would be this amazing, frightening fear. And then what would happen, some people have this experience when they do heroic doses of medicine, where the ego starts shutting down, and then your mind starts grasping at things that it knows. It's just really amazing thing to watch, because it identifies with itself. Some people bypass it and just go into the light, quote unquote, and they can relax. We have to have a relationship with that. You know, we live in a culture that's so disconnected from death. Our absurdly high medical expenditure every year, trillions of dollars, half of that in the last 10 days of someone's life. So what does that say to you? It says like we actually have no relationship with death. I'm not saying there's no place for heroic medicine, but certainly if someone's 90 and then you're doing all these incredibly invasive things to them when they're going to actually die anyway, what is that about? Right? I've been in hospitals many times when I used to work in them, and these very kind, loving doctors would walk in to someone's like literally 50 pounds on their deathbed and be like, you look great today. You're looking good. As that's not the thing you want to say to someone like that. You want to give them space to have grace in their exit. So we have this thing that we have to be conscious of. The culture does not deal with death very well, right? People die. We put lipstick on them. We put, you know, makeup on them. We put them in a nice suit. Again, I get that. I'm all into rituals, but there's still a part we don't. Go to India and watch someone's skull explode on a pyre, and then we'll have a different experience than put makeup on. So we have to understand we're living in a culture that's in deep denial of this, and we all suffer for it, right? There's no closure. We suffer for it. So because we live in that culture, it's very important that we have our own rituals. We have our own rituals with death, and not death as a morose subject, you're working on daily dying so you can actually live more fully. So maybe the thing you're holding on to is not that important. Maybe this thing, what in the program we would call compare and despair, is not as strong. Oh my God, they have this. I can't believe they're here in their practice. I can't believe they have this boyfriend. I can't believe just all the things that we do to torture ourselves. And, we're amazing at torturing ourselves. So the thing we're talking about is just easier life, not changing the externals, not moving the furniture, internally having a different relationship.
Yeah. That brings to mind Stephen Jenkinson and his book Die Wise. And he talks about living in a death phobic culture, and that one of the skill sets we could really use is how to die.
Oh,
And
yeah. Oh, yeah.
I'd love to hear your thoughts because of your experience. And I know you've had a long time sitting by the bedsides of people who are dying. Yeah. What does it mean to know how to die? What does that mean to you?
So you die the way you live. You die the way you live. It really is informed by that. So you can speed that up by the experience of everyday sitting. And no one really sits and talks about death. We can be hypochondriac. I know many people like that. They're constantly have this fear of death over them, but they're still not dealing with it. So one thing is, no one actually believes they're going to die if push comes to shove. So when it comes on you by a surprise of an accident or a illness, or even if you're, into ripe old age, very few people have actually made peace for the fact that this is very transient here. It's not a sexy topic. It can be scary. In my experience, it's actually an experience that makes life more fully. Now, I'm not saying you need to do that at 20 years old. I had to because I've seen a lot of suffering as a child, and for me, it was something I was drawn to. But when you're getting a little bit more along, when you get a little bit longer in the tooth, it's absolutely important that we do that, especially in a culture that does not have any way of doing that. There's some incredible men and women I've met in the hospice movement, where especially that's actually gotten fortified in the last couple of decades, where they're aware of it. They're exactly the doulas. Instead of giving birth, they're giving death, and the same kind of love and compassion in it. But again, it's very simple stuff. Literally sit down. Any person that's listening to this, lay down, act as if you're on your deathbed. Don't go into the angelic realms or tell some nice story about that. Just feel the fear of it. Or what are you sad about? Or what are you leaving behind? What have you not experienced? That experience is very, very powerful. And again, the intent here is to live more fully. The intent here is not to, oh my God, this is so horrible. It's actually so we don't waste our energy on times on things that aren't important. Now, there's a level of psychological maturity we have to get to do that. And that usually comes from getting 2x4s of life broken on our head. So we actually get humbled and, not in a punishing way, but so we kind of let go a little bit, right? So we can soften a little bit. So it's a huge topic. It's actually quite simple. What is everything we've talked about so far? Attention. The common thread in everything we've talked about is put attention on it. The amazing thing is how difficult that attention is to develop in a culture that is constantly beckoning your attention. And consumerism is a part of that. Now, again, you know me very well. I'm a freak with motorcycles and racing, and I'm totally in this relationship with matter. I'm not saying anti-relationship. I'm saying conscious relationship, right? So attention goes to these things, and you pull it back. And this Chinese image of the heart, quote unquote, seat of spirit becoming disturbed by too much attention going out is a very powerful image. So we want to just draw the energy back a little bit inside of us, internally gaze, literally just physically. So let the ears and the eyes and the mouth rest. We're talking minutes. I'm serious, 5 minutes a day. See what that feels like, right? So just this stranger that you call yourself, start having a relationship. Start having a relationship. That's the base of all these things.
Yeah, I think that is, again, it's the just doing of it,
Yes.
and
Yes.
without the fear.
Yes.
And also this, so when we talk about a death practice, when we talk about what you were just describing, just lie down and be in that place, right? And I'm hearing this like intuitively, right? The listeners, am I not manifesting my own death if I do that fully?
So that's a very important question. It's actually very important. I can say this to you. If we were that strong with thinking, there wouldn't be one person walk around the planet, because the level of negativity we all throw at ourselves all the time, self-anger, self-hate, self-judgment, we'd be walking dead. So no, these thoughts don't manifest it. What we're doing there is to actually becoming conscious of what we're afraid of all the time anyway. The fear of death is a very powerful unconscious force for most of us, where we're actually pushing away at it. So no, you wouldn't manifest that. So people say this, I've actually heard this a lot, like, oh my God, I don't want to manifest that. If we were that powerful with just one thought we did that, most people would be dead, because most people are constantly, all of us have thrown all these energies at ourselves, you know? So no, what you're doing is literally doing a practice of what does it feel like? What does it feel like if this is not permanent? And you'd be amazed. A lot of things that you might think are important kind of calm down. A lot of things that we struggle with actually calm down. And we also cross our T's and dot our I's, right? We have this experience. So one thing I've learned from being around this, far from perfect, but the best of my ability, I really want to have a conversation with someone. I'm also older now. You know, I actually do, like, I might not talk to this person again, right? I just had this experience, and this man that I love very much just died suddenly in his sleep a couple of nights ago. A very profound experience. And I just remember the last time I spoke to him, he wasn't really well, but there was nothing wrong with him. Kind of had this, and I just like always just, hey man, I love you. Been a great run. We've known each other now, you know, 50 years, and what a sweet soul you are. Just this experience. I didn't talk to him, drops dead in his sleep. It's that experience too, where you're really engaged, where instead of like, oh my God, I wish I had said this. Oh my God, I wish I said that. It just makes the suchness of life so much more immediate. It doesn't mean there's not still a heartbreak. Doesn't mean you don't miss this person. But I know for a fact, if I hadn't said this to this person, I'd have a very different experience right now. It would be as much of a peace. So this is also part of the gift of this dying experience. You really get like, oh my God, this is really like temporary. Very hard for a 20-year-old to get that, 30, 40, you know, depending on your experience. But we're not here for always, right? And this love piece is the juiciest part of it. When we're afraid of dying, we're also afraid of the loving. And that's a given. You can only love this deeply if you still have this fear you're going to lose something, right? You know this as a therapist, and this as a therapist, many of us have issues around love because we don't want to lose, right? Like I just had talking to someone who loves dogs, and was like, I'm never going to get a dog because they're going to die. And as a guy who's had 3 animals who suffered deeply after they died, I get that. But I'm also like, man, that's a loss, because it's also an amazing 10, 15 years of undifferentiated love from the other side to experience this. Not judging it, that's their choice. I'm totally into not suffering. I'm just saying to be conscious of these things. So facing these fears, we're not doing it, you know, willy-nilly. We're doing it to live fully. All of this is to be able to experience life more fully, right? This temporary, incredible thing that it is, and it's very painful a lot of times and incredibly beautiful at other times, to make the needle go a little bit more towards the incredible, a little bit less towards the pain.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And isn't it interesting, this pain of separation we were talking about from the divine, that where, you know, this is what, so energy never dies, it just changes form, being my science geek over here, right? So when we die and our energy is dispersed back into the collective, so interesting that now once we're in this heavy place and in this lower vibrational physical form, even though there is no concrete matter. So interesting that part of us still is afraid to return to that place that we didn't want to separate from in the first place.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, again, it's the forgetfulness, right? The whole thing with Gabriel, the archetype of Gabriel putting the finger on the upper lip, which is where the invitation comes from. It was like, forget, be quiet, forget this, right? So what we're doing is just gently taking that finger up and like, well, I want to remember a little bit, so I'm not in this fear mode. The forgetfulness makes you experience this realm more, right? You have to be a little bit separated. Otherwise, like, who cares? Then what do you experience about a son, a daughter, a dog, a cat, a motorcycle? The separation makes you experience, but the separation also makes you suffer. So the part is like, how can you soften that separation? It's as simple as what we're saying, right? It's as simple as like sitting and just sitting with that uncomfortableness. It's incredible how much can clear up when we just sit with that. You don't need intellectual understanding. You don't just try it. Or just try it. Like whoever's listening to this, you just wasted, you know, an hour of your time listening to 2 people yabber. Take this away from it. 5 minutes a day, sit down and be like, what the hell is this guy talking about? What is she talking about? Let me just sit and investigate this. And I can invite people to do that. End of the day, the investigation is always there. Something happens inside of us that we actually answer it. something happens, right? And it's almost always something painful. A
Mhm.
breakup, betrayal, which is amazing part of this realm. God, so much fun. Loss of someone, loss of a thing, loss of an animal, and then we investigate. These things should not go to waste. They're profound, profound gifts that they come in. We're suffering from it anyway. Might as well actually answer the call and investigate this, right? And like I always say, with me and you have talked about this, the veil is very thin right now.
Yeah.
So part of the thinness is like this kind of craziness that we see. Part of the thinness is like you can actually ground in this. And the thing I was sitting with before our session today, no matter what the question, love is the answer.
Mhm.
No matter what the question, no matter what the situation, love with the capital L, right? Not the idiot compassion, as the Buddhists say. That's just the caretaking, codependence. But internally, love with the capital L is the answer, especially in these times where people are at each other's throats and I'm right, you're wrong, I'm right. Whatever your set is, like, do your little game, come back home and recenter. Like, where's this love piece inside? Where's the part that can actually hold this love piece? And then go do whatever you got to do and put on your favorite, attitude to that. But at the end of the day, stabilizing consciousness is the biggest gift we can give to this level. And that doesn't mean being dissociated. That doesn't mean not caring about human life. That doesn't mean not caring about animals or nature. It just actually means you can be better mobilized to answer when a thing comes if you're in a more centered place.
Yeah. And you just touched on something extremely important that I want to focus in on a little bit more, which is the dissociation, right? So and again, back to the turbulent times, right? So there's I don't know why it does that. It's just, I've
That's
turned it off.
amazing.
Listen, I have, and I'm not at all shy to talk about this. I have turned this service off on the
That
recording
was
program
amazing.
and it won't turn off. So I just call it the ghost in the machine. So for people listening and not watching, I got a little bubble with a thumbs up in it because I moved, because I'm Italian. When I speak, I move my hands. So, right. So the dissociation part, because we are in times and there's so much division and there's so much anger and so much woundedness that is playing itself out all over the world. It's very easy to just say, well, fuck this, I'm going inside. Like, I'm not going to engage with this anymore. And that can lead to the loneliness, I think, that you were talking about earlier. So that balance in turbulent times, circling it back around, is it is more of a sense of being part of it, but as you said, being discerning about and conscious of what you're taking in and how much, right? And I'm
Well,
so
absolutely. I mean, you were talking about something before we had talked about, not today, but me and you had this conversation about getting older. What does that mean? How does one navigate those waters? It really is about having a relationship with self. End of the day, if you've abandoned yourself, it doesn't matter what's happening outside. So I'm not saying to people, do this, do that. That's up to them. I'm saying have a relationship with yourself and from that place engage, right? I'm very into being engaged in the world. As soon as I lose my center, I don't care if I'm reading something or absorbing something. As soon as I lose my center, it's not fun. I don't like what happens. So I always go back in, keep my center. I'm a citizen of the world. I've been raised in many different continents. I love the world. How do I actually keep that center? And now it's not about negating it. There are things that happen that are really off in the world. There are things that are incredibly cruel. But again, my answer isn't to become cruel on top of it. My answer is like, how do I hold this capital L love energy while actually being engaged in the world? So it's about, to your point, it's not about being disconnected. Although that seems to be happening. I mean, some of the things that we do to each other can only come from disconnection.
Yeah.
Right? And the more disconnected you get, the more the nervous system goes crazy. If you look at it shamanically, the more the dark energies can attach to you, whatever your language around that stuff, that stuff is real. Right? So the invitation again is like, how do you keep that center while being here? We're not monks. We're householders, right? Regardless of like what your relationship status is, or if you have a pet or you don't, we're householders. So this is a different way of being in the world.
Yeah, it's actually being in it, right?
Actually being in it, not being on top of it. Most of us are all the time in our head. You see this all the time, right? You're driving by somewhere, you miss the exit. You're walking somewhere, you forget something. That's not being here. It certainly looks identical. Certainly when you're around someone who's here is a very different experience, right? When we're around someone's present, we look in their eyes, we feel them. It's a feeling. many of the times we can just go on automatic, right? And sometimes, yeah, you're late for work, but I find even those times are very powerful to practice that. I'm behind something, I feel my anxiety, I'm just like, slow it down, slow it down, slow it down. That's the real connection.
Yeah.
Mm.
As we round out, I wonder
Mm-hmm.
if you might lead us in a little bit of what that would feel like
Beautiful.
to drop in. Do you
Yep.
mind?
Not at all. It's wonderful. It's way better
Okay.
than all the yapping. So, wherever you are, just put your feet on the ground, or if you're laying down, you can lay down. Where our awareness is where the energy flows. So, literally start by feeling your lower body. And when I say feeling, you're not thinking about your lower body, you're kinesthetically becoming aware of your lower body. So, the energy goes where the awareness is. The awareness is always in the head and outside. So, feel the feet. Now, gently tuck your chin in, even if you're laying down or if you're sitting, put your chin in a little bit. What that does is actually slows the mind from flowing. Lift the back of your skull towards the ceiling. If you're sitting, towards a wall, if you're laying down. Elongate the posture. You're feeling your feet. Your neck is up and straight. Your spine is nice and stretched. Now you can relax it. Next, feel your belly and feel if there is any holding in your gut or in your belly or in your stomach, which most of us actually hold. Take a deep breath, fill it up, push it out. Relax it. While keeping the awareness on the feet, on the strengthening the spine. Another deep breath. And let it go. Keeping the body awareness, let your body get nice and heavy. Let the musculature relax. Let the bones hold you up. Become aware of any sounds in the room. Could be a humming of a fridge. Could be traffic outside. Could be ringing in your ear. It's as if you got an Alka-Seltzer tablet, which is your thinking mind, and you just dissolved it first in the body and then into the room. So be your body, and then let the consciousness be in the room. And feel the sense of expansion. Just feel the body and mind, how it relaxes when you dissolve that Alka-Seltzer of attention into the body and then through the encompassing area. And then any sounds that might have been distracting become a bell to attention, as if you're in a monastery. So if there's buzzing, if there's neighbors walking upstairs, traffic, that's just noise bringing you into the moment. And take another deep breath. Let it. Now I want you to keep this awareness and open your eyes if your eyes were closed. And feel how even with open eyes, you can keep this relaxed awareness. Again, the image of that Alka-Seltzer tablet. It wants to reform. We just keep it melted in the body.
Beautiful. Thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Practice really is, if you take one thing away from our talk, practice this a couple of minutes a day. It's pretty life-altering stuff and the most beautiful self. Don't be a stranger with yourself. Make friends. Make friends. You'll be nicely surprised.
Yeah, right. It's
Nicely
like
surprised.
with you from day one to the last day.
That's it.
And I don't want to talk too much. I want us to be able to hold this
Beautiful.
and thank you so much, Abdi Assadi. His books are available. I don't know, are both of them available on your website now or just the Healer's Handbook?
They are e-form. The actual books aren't anymore, but they're both on e-form. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
beautiful. So
Yeah.
those are available. Of course, I'll have the website in the show notes, abdiassadi.com. Thank you, Abdi.
So nice connecting with you, my sweet sister. And we'll talk when the time is right.
Yes, we will.